Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm No02, and Relic just released within like the last 24 hours what they're calling a small update, a patch notes, a hot fix. Really, they're even saying that this patch may not address all balance concerns right now, as we want to make incremental changes and assess their impact. They're currently experimenting with changes out for outstanding issues. So this is intended to be small. Now, before we get into too much else, we do need to mention here that this patch has brought in a bunch of bugs. A bunch of bugs. Not only that, some of the changes listed below are not implemented, or were not implemented as intended. Some bugs that I've been seeing, the officer upgrade for the 4x4 Jeep for the USF is not there. The upgrade is just not there. It's disappeared. It's gone. I don't believe that was intended. The boys' anti-tank rifle seems to be dealing bug damage, and that it's dealing almost zero damage, like none at all to some extent. It's doing so little damage it seems unintentional. I'm sure there's other bugs out there as well, but those are just like the two most sort of obvious ones, or more in the obvious vein. And also, to keep in mind that the things that we're talking about here today, not all of them are actually in the game. I'm not going to go over every single one. It's a little hard to test without going into the numbers as far as like, oh, does the Chaffee actually have 20% more range, accuracy, things like that. But just keep that in mind that some of the stuff here is just not actually implemented. And if I can get on my soapbox here and rant just a little bit, how just it's not really the content of the patch notes that I'm really worried about. It's just the implementation. If you have watched me cover Turtle Rock, something that I saw constantly with Turtle Rock, or that we saw with Turtle Rock updates for Back for Blood, is constant missteps. When it comes to updates and patch notes for a dev team, this is your most powerful line of communication. Patch notes and updates is your opportunity to restore faith with people who are waiting and seeing, people who are maybe a little upset. To some degree, we know you can never satisfy the trolls, right? But really, like, this updates are your opportunity to gut punch uh, all of the people who are trash talking your game and fixing the problems and making people who enjoy the game but feel like there's, right. You understand what I'm getting at? Like, the patch notes is a really big opportunity for communication and restoring hope between the dev team and the player base. And when you see things implemented incorrectly, things are not true in the patch notes as far as how they're affecting the game, that it brings more bugs and it does more problems. Like, this patch notes, it's like things were not implemented, but it brought more bugs. So, like, in a weird way, like, this update has made the game worse, just like almost objectively. And not even from a balance point of view, if like it's just that the game has more bugs now, right? And more bugs that impact gameplay. I just feel like that's a huge, huge miss. Like, I just feel like you can't do this. It's not the end of the world or anything, but these are your big opportunities to get people to say, "Hey, look, Relic is on it, and they're fixing it, and they're working on it. Give them time." Um, so a little painful there for me. Um, and maybe I'm just a little too harsh on this concept because I went through a year of live service with Back for Blood and Turtle Rock, and every single update and every single patch was filled with issues and bugs and things that were not implemented, and things were implemented but weren't in the patch notes, and oh goodness, it was painful. So this, they're calling it a small update. I personally think this is a rather big update, but um, let's note here that this patch may not address all balance concerns right now as we make incremental changes, blah blah blah. This as a concept I really appreciate. Personally, I think this update's a little too big maybe, but if this is what Relic considers a small update, then I can't wait to see what they get in their big updates. There's a general concept. Company of Heroes is a really new game, and when it comes to metas and balancing and things like that, personally, in the early days, I like timid changes because it takes time. It just takes time for metas to be formed, for players to figure out what's good and what's bad, and that happens at different paces for the higher levels and the average player base, like the plebs. They live in two different worlds, and so It takes time for things to sort of mold and balance and change and evolve. The example that I always love to use is actually StarCraft Brood War, a video game that's being played in esports for like 20 years. And that game has not received like a major update for like 20 years. Yet, still, at the highest level of gameplay, you would still see different factions become grand champion. You'd see different strategies implemented every year. They would still discover new, weird, nuanced things about the game and how to play it, despite the fact that the game didn't ever receive an update, almost at all. And I would say that for most RTS games that have an active, healthy, professional player scene or high level scene, that is sort of the case. That will also be the case. Um, so that's why I'm a bigger fan of more timid, smaller updates at the start and getting more bold with as time goes on because you get more data and you sort of see where everything begins to settle and things like that. So happy to hear that at least from Relic that this is a timid update. Some universal changes. I also want to mention that I play USF and I play DAC. So when it comes to some of these update changes, I'm going to skip over them because I want to come from a place of authority. I'm not going to pretend like I understand the full impact of these changes. I mean, half of them are not even implemented anyways, right? So we'll try and cut through the fluff here. Indirect mortars, they got faster recharge time on the barrages. The smoke barrage is unaffected. Mortar damage versus emplacements is doubled. We'll see this again for the medium indirect fire units. They got a reduced recharge time on their barrages, but they deal more damage versus bunkers and emplacements, better accuracy on their auto fire as well as their barrage, and they also fire more rapidly. It's actually kind of a really nice buff overall. I think to mortars, though, the nerf of you need to make sure if you do a barrage and you miss, or your target moves, um, you get punished more for it, right? So there's a little bit more, uh, maybe hesitancy or skill or need to, be certain of your target. But overall, this is going to most directly impact like team games where people are very defensive, building a lot of things. Smoke duration from 40 to 30. This has sort of been ridiculous. Smoke is incredibly powerful. It's like one of the strongest things in the game. Every faction has some measure of access to it. I would love to see it still be in the game, but this makes sense to me as far as nerfing it, just because smoke is ridiculous. It's just so strong. All heavy machine guns have had their suppression and area suppression increased by roughly 10 to 15%. I do think that blobbing infantry has been a little too strong, and it does feel like in a lot of instances that the heavy machine gun, which should be the anti-blobbing infantry counter, has been a little weak. So we'll see how this goes. I personally, I would love to see more variety of units. Like that's a big part of just balancing games in general. And HMGs, especially in the sort of professional scene or the higher level scene, has been sort of foregone because the LMGs just or the HMGs just don't seem to be cutting it. So we'll see how it goes. But for the most part, I think to agree, like it's map dependent, it's skill dependent, and build order dependent, and things like that. U.S. forces. We noted that the U.S. forces are struggling in all modes, particularly in larger games. Blah blah blah. Been faltering in the mid game, so weapon support center manpower decreased from 160 to 120, and the motor pool fuel cost decreased from 55 to 45. I actually really like these changes because I have felt um, trying to skip things and be rigid in your build order, or trying to skip things or coming up with build orders for U.S. forces has been a little rigid. It's been a little hard to sort of justify skipping the barracks, skipping the riflemen outside of doing Pathfinder stuff. And really, too, I think it's really important to understand that some of these units that they're going to end up nerfing and buffing, a little confusing to me because in a lot of instances, it's not so much that a unit is too strong. It's more that a unit is too strong for the time that it comes out. And that's like the clear and obvious case with the WirbelWind. The WirbelWind as a unit, maybe it does a little bit too much DPS, but overall, it's just the timing of it hitting, right? It's the timing that it hits when you choose the Luftwaffe battle group when you're playing the Wehrmacht. And so that's the big issue. And so it's like when it came to USF versus WirbelWind spam, the issue was that you needed to cut every single corner to try and get a Chaffee onto the battlefield as quickly as possible. Otherwise, you were fighting a WirbelWind with a bazooka squad, right? And it was just like, and that all sort of came down to like the build order, the fuel expense, the expense of trying to get a Chaffee out as quickly as possible, and that meant you had to skip. You had to skip. Ideally, you would have to skip the weapon support center, or you had to get that weapon support center for the M3 truck, which kind of sucked. Trying to chase down a WirbelWind with that, it was squishy, right? And so it's like it was all it was more about when do the counters become readily available to deal with this unit, and the timing for the WirbelWind was just too strong, and that it would it would have like a good like 1 to 4 to 5 minutes, depending on how badly you're getting beaten because you got riflemen with no bar upgrades, and maybe you skip the grenade upgrades, and so just sort of like that's sort of where I saw the problem come from. Less that the WirbelWind's too strong, and just more that the timing that it hit was really really powerful, and some of the factions just didn't have direct answers to it for too long. Rifleman health per model increased from 95 to 100. I don't think the riflemen really needed this. The riflemen do this weird curve where they're decently strong at the beginning, and then they sort of take a dip into the mid game, and then once they get their double bar upgrade plus their vet 1 with their port on them, they take a huge spike back up, becoming like the strongest infantry in the game at like medium range to close range. Kind of funny the riflemen do that. So I don't know if they necessarily needed the health buff, but I mean, I'm USF main, so we'll take that. Bazooka team. This is I think, a great sort of tweak to the bazooka team because with the airborne battle group being so strong right now, you would just build paratroopers for 320, right? 320 manpower for a paratrooper, and you can upgrade them with bazookas, and they were more combat effective. The bazooka team's 4 man. They're still squishy with the 90 health, but this will help. I really think though that just the 250 cost was really what they needed because for the price that you paid, you just didn't get a unit that was that really that capable. It's very specialized. It's not flexible at all. It's literally just an anti-light vehicle unit, and it can do some chip damage in the medium armor range. And beyond that, like the bazooka team was pretty damn weak. So I think this makes more sense for the bazooka team. The mortar, I have had great success with the USF mortar. The fact that it's getting buffed is really good. I think this is more because of team game stuff, right? We need to remember that some of these changes are addressing the fact that the average player base struggle with certain things, and the higher level player base struggle with different things. A great example, we'll talk about it more when we get there, is going to be the double flamer unit and how that's a unit that's easily countered by micro and maneuvering, which is something that average players struggle with, but higher players don't. And you sort of see how people complain about that unit in the forums and on Reddit. um, but the pro player, you don't even see it in pro play. It's sort of like the void ray in StarCraft 2. Low level players get crushed by it, but high level players don't even build it because it's a bad unit, right? Like it's a sort of a funny thing about RTS games in general. Airburst, their cooldown got reduced. The munitions cost got reduced as well. I actually kind of like this. It's a little painful to see the vet ability for some units cost munitions. I feel like part of that vet ability should be the fact that that munitions ability or cost is actually like cheap, surprisingly cheap, because it's like that unit's special ability. You want the player to be rewarded for getting that unit vetted up. So having it like behind a paywall mid match is sort of a little painful. Um, but I think the airburst is really great for anti-infantry. Delayed fuse is probably for the team games to make it more viable as a anti-defensive unit, which is sort of like what the mortar is designed for in general. Airburst barrage effect damage has been adjusted. I don't know what that means. Sniper aim time. This is strange because this is again something that you don't see at lower levels. But I wasn't so sure about where they're getting this data. Sniper gets buffed for the USF. Um, I think of like almost my 50 games, I've seen one person build a sniper at all. It just doesn't happen that often. So, a high micro unit and the average player base don't want to micro or don't like microing or not good at it. M3 75 gun mortar carriage. This is like the cannon. It's a 75 millimeter cannon that you can get crazy early for the USF. It actually comes like too early as far as like it dealing with stuff, but like in theory that you can get this out reliably and comfortably versus the WirbelWind versus the Flame Tank, sort of like those early game annoying vehicles. Um, I don't know. It's sort of a janky unit to use. I think it's definitely I think it's overall an undervalued unit. Accuracy buff on it so that it can shoot from a distance because it's a light vehicle. It's squishy. It's very easy. Like light infantry can shoot at it. And when you do this upgrade, it literally it versus infantry is painful because infantry show up and just shoot it and deal damage, and it shoots back and it misses 90% of the time. Now here's another timing thing: Greyhound. They are nerfing the Greyhound and buffing the Chaffee, and this to me is a little confusing because I think the Chaffee is way better. The issue with the Greyhound for me is that unless you are cutting all of your fuel corners to get the Greyhound out as quickly as possible, the Greyhound just almost doesn't hit the battlefield at the correct time. The Greyhound hits the battlefield around the time that the Greyhound versus the WirbelWind is not like an ideal matchup. The Greyhound is great, super powerful, ideal anti-light vehicle, anti-infantry unit. But when it comes to dealing with medium armor, the Greyhound really struggles. And so I just feel like the Greyhound came a lot of times um, too late, unless you cut a lot of corners, and then you're suffering elsewhere in your rifleman department, in your in your unit diversity department. And the Chaffee I actually think is quite strong in that it hits at the same time as the Greyhound almost, but it deals with all of the problems that the Greyhound can't, but can still shoot a little bit at infantry. I think the Chaffee is actually way better, so it's a little silly to me that they're nerfing this and buffing this. But I don't know. Maybe the timing for the Greyhound is different in team games. That's really important to note. Is that I'm thinking more in terms of 1v1, and a lot of times it just feels like the Greyhound comes too late. Maybe that's just my build orders. Maybe that's just the fact that I don't want to skip certain stuff. Hellcat. Reload time between shots is being buffed. It's going to shoot almost on average 2 seconds faster. Almost 2 seconds faster. That's a huge buff, I think. Very strong. I've been really loving the Hellcat in general, though. I know people like the Sherman. I know people think the Sherman might need to be nerfed, but I've actually been really enjoying the Hellcat. It's got a slightly bigger barrel. It's faster. It's got longer range. I just think the Hellcat is a better anti-tank vehicle, and the Sherman sort of falls more nicely in the general purpose vehicle. The Weasel. This is a strange one to see nerfed. The mortar and the machine gun drop ability costs 75 munitions instead of 50. I did make that video where we did like the double mortar opener with the Weasel. You can absolutely get an unbelievable, an unholy amount of weapon teams very quickly with the Weasel. It almost makes me feel like that this is being maybe abused in team games where munitions can sort of flood in more regularly. But I don't know. This is strange. Because it's not like it's cheap. You still need to reinforce the units. It's still quite expensive. It's only like 100 manpower save per weapon drop, and but still but also too you pick up a new unit, so that puts more strain on your manpower. Um, Overall, it's a little weird to me. And then I think they increased the recharge time. I think it was only 30 seconds before. Sherman Whizbang. This is a unit that I would love to see more of. They made the rocket bajar, the barrage, 90 seconds instead of 120, and tightened up the area of effect distance, I believe, or no, a rocket area effect damage distance from. I don't know what that means. I'm sorry. Rocket angle scatter, 12 to 11, so tighter barrage. Scatter max 11 to 9. So again, just overall tighter barrage at maximum distance. The battle groups. Paratrooper bazooka cost from 90 to 75. I think it's crossed out because this is not implemented, which is nice if that's the case. I'm assuming that this stuff is not really implemented. HMG cost got reduced. Anti-tank gun cost got reduced. The bombing run cost got reduced. Costs from munitions for the special operations smoke screen got reduced. I'm assuming that all these things have not been properly implemented, so we might see them in the future, but they're not in the game at the moment. British forces. If you watch AoE COH's review of the updates, in the higher levels of play, we saw Wehrmacht and we saw British forces. They sort of it seems to be at the higher levels right now that British forces are considered to be stronger, um, or like the top two. But here it seems like they're buffing them because they are believed to be weaker. So I'm not going to go through this too like tooth and comb here, fine tooth comb. But the boys' bug rifle got nerfed, but right now it's sort of like bugged nerf maybe. Foot guards got manpower cost changed. It's already 400. I don't know what this means. 399 to 400, some sort of weird typo. Commando LMG section got buffed here. A lot overall, like a lot of buffs. Just sort of like a lot of buffs. This is like the flak cannon truck is actually really really weak. um, so that makes sense to buff that. The Humber got buffed. The received weapon overhaul and is significantly more lethal versus against infantry. Very cryptic language. We'll sort of see what the light vehicle options sort of look like now for the British in the long term. Because this also to the Stuart, the cost to unlock it has been reduced, I believe, to 1030. Fuel cost overall got released. So I actually really like the Stuart as a tank. I've played around with it a little bit. Very cool, sort of like a light tank support tank unit because it like transition, like the timing that it can potentially hit is kind of nice. Helps your infantry, and it's got abilities that allow it to sort of transition into being a support vehicle for your late game tanks and things like that. Matilda Arma increased to 300, 200, and 100 sort of overall. Very cool stuff here. Churchill Black Prince. I've never seen this tank. I know it's like the Tiger tank esque sort of vein for the British forces. Never seen it. I don't know if I'll ever see it. um, it's getting an overall buff to a degree, though. It's important to note that some of these buffs and some of these nerfs are being packed together, which is quite nice to see. So its speed is being reduced, but its armor being increased, damage increased, range nerfed, things like that. The Wehrmacht. We got the Panzer Company manpower cost from 200 to 300. Sort of a build order nerf there. Bunker health reduced. Kettenkrad communications cable cost 25 to 35. This is actually really important. I think this is actually a really big nerf to the Kettenkrad because you begin every single match with 25 munitions. So if you want to do an economic opener, you can build the Kettenkrad, which allows you to capture things more quickly because they can get there faster. But also, too, by the time it captured its very first thing, you can have it finished upgrading. And then everything that it captures is getting that buff. And especially for fuel, that can be really, really powerful. So the fact that you got to wait for you to capture one munitions point and then start counting up to 35, this is actually hurting the Kettenkrad in that it could originally capture with the buff right out the gate, and now it needs to capture 2 to 3 things before this buff hits. And so that's actually a big nerf in going from 1 to 4-ish, maybe. So there might be some interesting openers where you maybe even delay capturing a thing while you wait for it to upgrade. We'll have to see. The Nebelwerfer. This is the rocket barrage. Overall, it's getting buffed as well. Tighter spread, faster shooting, things like that. Fires more rapidly, less cooldown. WirbelWind. This is the big one. Accuracy decreased 30% at long range, 15% at short range. So this will overall affect its DPS. Area of effect damage reduced as well. Long range cooldown between burst increased by 50%. I think in a general sense maybe it was doing too much DPS and so maybe the nerfs are warranted. But I really just feel like the issue with the Wirbelwind was the timing that it hit, and like it just hits too early. And so we'll see how this looks and feels. I think the Wirbelwind is still going to be very strong. Like I think this is not going to change the Wirbelwind spammed almost at all. Because when it hits the battlefield and you realize you look at your army composition, you got nothing to deal with it, that's what hurts. That's where the pain comes from. Right? Because a lot of lower level players don't know that the most correct thing to do is just put everything in your base and wait. That's the most correct thing to do when you don't have an answer to the Wirbelwind. Um, And the lower level players are not going to do that, right? And if they do, they're going to be upset and they get frustrated and be mad about it. So we'll just have to wait and see exactly what this change does. But I think overall, it's not going to really affect the sort of power spike the WirbelWind brings when it hits the battlefield. Panzer IV cost increased 430 manpower, 90 fuel, to 440 and 100 fuel. Population increased. I mean, the Panzer IV is a super solid tank. Let's see when it hits. I think for the most part, though, like again, like it's like a timing thing, you know. Like for the most part, the Panzer IV hits the battlefield at a decent time that just about every faction, right, every USF and the British forces can have potential answers to it by the time it hits. So increasing its cost, I don't know. I guess it's a value thing. It's just getting too much bang for its buck. But for the timing that it hits, the Allied forces have answers to deal with it. The Luftwaffe battle group, the flak emplacement, now requires either Luftwaffe company requires a tech building, and the cost has been increased. And this flak emplacement does so much damage. It does an unbelievable amount of damage. Um, it's actually insane. I think, or is it the eight, or is it this one, the 88 sentence? I think it's the 88 that does the insane amount of damage. Either way, some of those flak emplacements are just like super painful to deal with. They're like super hard to destroy because they get demanned before they actually blow up. And it's like hard to destroy weapons in this game, and you can repair it. And these are just huge burdens to deal with. And I can imagine that in team games, that these are just like destroying, like these are the pub stomping, noob stomping emplacements that people just break their armies against. So I think it makes sense to nerf them in that sense, but absolutely not a thing that you see in high level play. I actually think that one of these has been banned from the Master League right now because it's actually bugged, and I don't know how it's bugged, but that's just the case here. Luftwaffe battle group cost increase from 3 to 4 command points. Um, I don't know what this is. Combat group? Which one? What is it? Anyways, I do like that. I like the idea of tweaking command points because that implies that things hit at different times. The infantry reserves costs from 3 to 4. So again, like this ability hits at a different timing now. Africa Core. Fire support elements cost from 125 fuel and 35 to 150 to 445. This is actually kind of a big nerf, I think. Not decent, a big nerf in that it's really going to hit the timing for the flak truck of the DAC. And also too, I think the the artillery, the was it the LEG 18 or whatever motor stuff here. Support elements, manpower cost from 125 to 100. Interesting, buffing that. This is the faction that I play a little bit of. This is my other faction, but right now I've been maining a lot of USF. MG34 light machine gun long range lethality decreased by 15%. Right, Panzer Jaeger squad from 5 to 4. I think that's sort of a big deal. Um, decrease the rate of fire of their long range anti tank rifles. This is the unit that you have to get through a call-in. You can't actually build it. The motorcycle build time from 20 seconds to 35 seconds, so sort of hurting that early game economy. 250 light carrier. This is a unit that I don't think needed to be touched at all. Increasing its manpower, decreasing its lethality across the board, short and long range. This is a unit that I definitely feel like sort of reflects the fact that in the early game versus sort of more lower level units, this this is dominating, right? And I've seen a lot of like get a flamethrower, pop it in the back of the 250, and you drive it around. Can be really annoying to deal with, but I mean, like again, like if you got green cover and you got two rifles or two squads shooting at this, the 250 loses. The 250 like doesn't compete in a lot of ways, and it's super duper hard countered by anything anti light vehicle, you know. So I feel like In a lot of ways, I don't think this was super necessary because I mean, in one sense too, like this takes away from having an extra squad on the field that can capture things, and um, but I just feel like that maybe to a degree this was overperforming somewhere, but it's not something that you really see. Like once you learn how to deal with it, you're good to go. The medical truck manpower increased. I don't know if this was hitting at a weird time. There's definitely like I think in general there might be a little bit of an issue with like the eternal army sort of setup where you just like have a front line and the truck is right behind them, just out of vision, constantly healing units. The flak furling half truck not only did unlocking the tech to get access to the truck got nerfed, this also got nerfed from costing an extra 20 manpower and an extra 5 fuel, which for the most part, this truck would hit the battlefield at the same time that you can get an M16 onto the battlefield, which is the USF's version of the flak truck. And they were pretty comparable in power as far as them like dealing with each other. So I don't know if this needed to be nerfed. Recovery half truck, yeah, this like they're all. I think all of the recovery vehicles should be buffed because like it's just not a thing that you see. It's incredibly slow. The idea of like fully restoring a vehicle back to life is in the middle of a 1v1. Maybe it's more viable in a team game, but it's pretty long winded. It's a slow process. It not only does it cost stuff, it's a drain on your resources. It's just, I don't know. I would love to see the recovery trucks get a stronger buff and so they have like they can actually have some sort of play around. The walking Stuco rocket half truck, area damage from I don't know, 1 to I don't know if this is making it tighter or worse or not. Though the scatter max from 20 to 15. So this is the big one here. The Gustatori. This is a double flamer unit. Manpower cost increased from 400 to 440. Flamethrower cost from 80 to 90. Armor reduced from 1.5 to 1.25. I do think that this unit was doing a lot of damage. Its TTK is pretty insane. But again, this unit truly reflects how um, low level players struggle with certain things and higher level players don't. The average player base, I imagine that this unit is just absolutely shredding. It's a pup stomper. I mean, I've lost to it, but as I've played more, I've lost to it less and less. I've gotten better at dealing with it. Because again, like it's a flamethrower unit, like it needs to physically run into close range, and like if you got a well positioned heavy machine gun, or for USF, if you can suppress it in any way possible, or just micro against it, it can only shoot one thing at a time. If you got 2-3 units and you got two shooting at it, and it's chasing the other guy who's running away, like you can't fire the flamethrower. Um, it's just one of those units where it's not about necessarily having a counter unit to it. It's more about how you manage and maneuver your army to deal with it. Right? It's all about the micro. It's about player skill almost essentially on how well and effectively you deal with it. And if you don't maneuver against it and just let it walk up and kill you, then it kills you. Like it's just like that's the way it goes. And so I will say I think maybe this unit is too strong. But I think to some degree I would have liked to see a nerf to it later because again it's like it's a micro thing. I'm sorry guys, I'm going to say it's a skill issue when it comes to dealing with this unit. Not that it's bad that like oh like if you're good at the game then this unit doesn't work, but like this unit has a place, a time and place, and a map style that it prefers. But I think in a lot of instances where people are just building it and winning games, it's not the unit's fault necessarily. It's more of a skill issue, I think. Uh, the battle group, the Bersaleri bolster cost decreased from 2 to 1 command points. I think this is in the tech tree, but the Model 30 light machine guns got increased in the command points. Um, that seems fair. I don't really think these units are an issue. Like I don't know. I've never had an issue. Like I don't know if these units need to be touched. The Carro Armato. or the Carrot Tomato. Cost decrease from 2 to 1. Now, this actually seems insane to me because watching this tank perform in the Master League, this is a crazy good vehicle. This is a super strong vehicle, and the fact that they're buffing it is bizarre. I think that because this is actually a really really strong vehicle. This vehicle punches, I think, very well above its weight class. And the fact that they're buffing it seems bizarre. Pact of Steel cost decrease from 3 to 1. I don't remember what Pact of Steel does. Bug fixes. The rifle grenades now have a minimum range of 15, which is funny because the minimum range for the Pathfinder grenades is tiny. It's like it doesn't even exist really. But now the rifle grenades have a huge, huge minimum range. The medical truck and the medical half tracks can now tow weapon teams. That's kind of cool. That's nice. 250 light carrier can now tow the 88 millimeter Flak 36 anti tank guns. Fix an issue where the Sherman whiz-bang rockets of area effect could miss targets. Fix an issue where the British mortar had less range than other mortars. Very cool. Lots of other bugs that have been added. I think overall, I if I had to summarize this, it definitely feels like to some degree things that didn't need to be nerfed got nerfed. Things that didn't need to be buffed got buffed. Um, but it's important to remember that this patch will not address all concerns right now. There's still plenty of issues in the game. I would say though, overall, as far as like the game's balance since release, it's not terrible. It's not like horribly disgusting as far as just like, oh, there's only one thing to do and clearly this is the best. But I think my only really big concern with this patch is the fact that it's brought in so many bugs. That's really the biggest issue. Man, I need to figure out how to get these patch notes done faster. Thank you guys for watching. I hope this was helpful. Would highly recommend that you watch AECOH's review of the patch notes. He does it faster than I do, but also too, he's got a better perspective as far as the higher level stuff is concerned. Thank you guys for watching. I appreciate it, and I will see you in the future.